Let me see if I can push you one little inch further or deeper from the last time. One of the things I was talking about. Since it is true, you should be able to see it. Since it is true that men are made to feel, that they do not automatically think and say the same thing. Since that should be clear. But since they are made to be aware of it and to feel something untoward about it, try and see if you can look a little further and ask yourself this. Is it then man's job, is it his duty to somehow learn to do this? Is that, in fact, can you see, going back to some of the external paradigms of religion, for instance, being an obvious one, could you see that all of the great religions, if you took what seemed to be their purported aim and turned it a certain way, what it is saying is, in a sense, you got to be able to see this now because I'm not going to try and prove it in some way, that a man to be, or a woman to be a good Jew, Christian, blah, 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 should be able to think and say the same thing. If that is too difficult, look at it the other way. Can you be a good Muslim, a good Buddhist? Can you believe that you would be pleasing the great forces of the gods if there were such external forces from all of this? If you would think one thing and then say something else. Nobody with any wired up ability and propensity to be religious in any sense would believe that. There's something drastically wrong with that. Because if you could then be a faithful follower of whatever God was the God of your religion and do that, I hate to point out to you this, but then your God would have the right to do that. And nobody wants a God like that. So in a sense, can you see, get beyond religion, what just seems to be, and perhaps in your own nervous system, what seems to be the kind of common wisdom around which you grew up, kind of philosophy that seemed to attract you, the kind of cult figures or whatever, during your younger days when you used to read, and you had some dream of doing something extraordinary, going somewhere exotic. Could you see that in a sense, no matter what it was called, no matter what you dreamed of it as being, in a sense, the job could be described, or the undertaking, if you joined up to some commune or some cult, pursued some philosophy as you understood it then. Apparently the outcome would be that you could think and say the same thing. That in fact it might reach this point, if you were really successful in the city sense, it would become natural. It would become mechanical. Is that man's job? Could that be a fair description of humanity's purpose? I'm not saying it is now. That's not one of my trick rhetorical questions, but could you see that that could be a fair question? Is all of this simply the attempt that you've got a few years and you're supposed to somehow learn, through whatever method, learn how to think and to say the same thing? No? Since man is made to believe, to feel, that this is not an automatic process in people, and yet there is built in also the feeling and the belief that I should be doing it, that it is possible and I should be doing it. Let me bring up something else. Since we have a lot of people out of town, and it's Friday, and we don't have much tape, I'll bring up something else that I'll bring up something else I never brought up for all the people that are not here. To hell with them. Teach them not to be here. Plus, I'm going to see to it it rains in Florida. But wait a minute, they're scuba diving. They don't care. All right, I got it. Never mind. I won't tell you. I know what I'll do. You ever seen a riptide that just tear your skin off? Forget your swimming trunks. Take your skin up. Let me bring out something. I'm not sure all of you, or many of you, were following how I started this when I asked you, is it possible, since men do not automatically think what they say, simultaneously. Could the purpose of life in some way be to learn how to do that? All right, if you learn how to do that and went far enough, is what I was insinuating when I used the words automatic or mechanical, that would become the way that whatever you said, if you said anything, was actually what you were thinking. Before we get into vice versa, a little something I never point out. There is a form of jazz talk. Now, you don't have to be musically inclined. You don't have to be musically inclined, because I'm saying jazz talk in a sense that, as opposed to what would seem to be an established, a beforehand known, that I know what I'm going to say because I know what I'm thinking. In some way, at least I've got a split second. The same way that a musician could be sight reading, that is, you pick up a piece of music you've never seen before, and you play it, and you can stay at least a split second that your eye is at least on the next couple of notes, trying to gobble them up while you're playing what you're playing right now. That's not too dissimilar, by the way, when I said it's not necessarily to be a musician, for people to co-read something, to pick it up and to stand up in public, stand up out loud, and to read something. A little past that, there's an area, is what I really mean by jazz talk, and I think I'll probably just present this to you sort of an aside, but it is profitable. There's something here. I wouldn't bring it up. I don't bring it up out of curiosity because there's nothing curious. There are people, ordinary people, city people, that are wired up in such a way that they apparently can engage in a kind of jazz speak. It is most commonly manifested in politicians, whatever they were called throughout the world. Now, I don't mean all of them. I'm talking about just a handful. And they've even been noted throughout history, thousands of years ago, that they'd be so-and-so. They could suddenly stand up in the Roman Senate, and he would say, or perhaps they knew, that I had not considered this problem that you presented. Some other senator is proposing something, and the man, extemporaneously, talked for 30 minutes, have them crying, have them laughing, have them wondering, and almost like he was conducting a symphony there, and they were all the musicians. There are people known as evangelists in the Protestant movement. TV's got them. If you've never seen them, go out and see when they're good out in tents. As opposed to politics, of course, they're apparently talking about godly shit. You know, waving Bibles and getting started. But the ones that are good, if you can get your nervous system unhung from that, it doesn't matter what they're saying, it's jazz speak. And they can go on for 45 minutes and have people crying. Now, your nervous system may be such that you might have grown up being a white-bread Presbyterian, and so you might think, well, these people, I can look at them. Most of them are in pickup trucks with gun racks, and so I'm not that impressed. But you should be, not impressed, but you should be interested that this guy can stand up there and take these people that showed up, put a little money in a pot that he passes around, they sit there and he starts out talking about apparently godly matters, but as I said, if you can disconnect yourself from that, it doesn't matter. That's just the basis. That's like the name of the nightclub is on the tent to get people in. It's like the name of a movie, and the movie says action adventure. And another tent or another cheap storefront church down the street says comedy. This one says so-and-so, Assemblies, the Powerhouse Church of Assemblies of God or something. Anyway, they start talking, and they can go on for 45 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. And apparently, running up and down and having this crowd of people crying, standing up and shouting. They can do that, and there is another group. Well, there's a lot of people. I just want to pick out 2 or 3 so that you could have somewhere to start from. There's some comedians, and I'm thinking specifically of in contemporary times that you would know of. I'm not going to name them. And it's nothing brand new. You had troubadours hundreds of years ago that could apparently get up. By all reports, all right, I know they could. I was going ahead and say, by all reports, they could even stand in front of a king. I'm talking about a king who had a firing squad behind him, and he'd say, we would like to be amused, and we heard that you were passing through, and we had you brought over here. I hear that you can, on the spot, make up a story and play your little lute and sing. The guy goes, well, so they say, and he says, do one about a girl who fell into a raspberry patch, and a young prince came by and saved her, but then stole all of her CDs when she wasn't looking. And when he says that, he kind of makes a little signal, and all the guards behind him They all make a step forward and cock their spears. And so the guy understands that this is serious. From all reports, the good ones could do that. All right, they're comedians. They're comedians alive right now that apparently can just walk up on the stage single-handedly and go on for hours, as they would call it, on a good night. Of course, it's a problem of a good night with the political speakers, jazz musicians, these so-called clerics that can just speak and play a crowd. They would all say this, and they have said this, but they would say this if I could present it to them in such a way to ask them a question. You know, ask them, did you plan what you talked about tonight? No, not really. If they really tried to get serious and truthful in the city sense, the minister, of course, would say, well, I read the Bible a lot, or I read a lot, I've got most of it memorized, and so I can, if I didn't plan anything, I can walk out and just think of some, since the Bible covers every damn thing in the world, you know, I could just think of anything. I could look at their pickup trucks and how many of them looked like they were in need of repairs, and I'm sure that one of those guys could come up with some, at least out of the Old Testament, something that he could immediately twist that would apply to, you know, you should take care of the vessels that the Lord puts in your trust. And those who do will be carried to glory. And then you can start about you people are not going to be carried to glory when your trucks won't run, and that blah, blah, blah. Well, you see what I mean. So he might say that. And he said, so I know enough that I've got something, and if I get stuck, I can, of course, I always got my Bible in my hand. I can always open up and say, well, all right, let's turn to so-and-so, and I can kill time, like I'm looking for something, all that. But then he would say, all right, on a good night, you're right, I don't have it planned. Once it gets going, and they'd say, of course, what it is. And they do say this, is some way the spirit of the gods come upon them. And they just speak the words of the truth, the words of the gods. A good musician. Those of you who are not musical inclined, if you're interested, just a little aside, a double aside, since they've had the term jazz, say since the turn of the century, those outside of music have attempted to define what jazz is, besides the point that it's some sort of on-the-spot improvisation, because in that strict sense, Chopin, Bach, Beethoven were improvising music on the spot 400 years ago. And they try to pin it down, people outside music, about exactly what is it. And then it really gets into a feel, and they've had people try to describe a certain kind of swing, which is synonymous, I would submit to you, any of you who are interested in following this very quickly. I'm about to stop this, but it'd be the difference between someone that you gave them a script and they stood up for their part and they read the words, pronounced every word exactly right. The pronunciation, they stopped at periods, they paused at commas, but they read it like, you know, whatever it was. And Kyroots said, the only useful struggles are always in real time. So they read it out and they read it right, to be like a musician playing the notes. Not a single musical faux pas. He played all the notes. And you could take a trumpet player, no offense to Lawrence Welk, and he could play the transcription of a solo by Louis Armstrong, and then bring up Armstrong, if we could dig him up, and he played it, and he played the same notes, and roughly the same the time involved, and yet one of them, if you were so inclined to music, one of them you thought, hey, be the difference between somebody getting up and co-reading something that had no acting ability, and then bring up Sir Laurence Olivier, with the kind of things they say that a good actor can read the phone book, blah, blah, blah. So there's that. That was the aside. But there is a level above that wherein these people, and it's not through any particular gift that they've earned, but the kind of people I'm talking about that apparently can engage in a kind of jazz talk, their nervous system is plugged in to a different place. And you can't look at it, I'm not inferring that there's some great metaphysical benefit, because there's not. Not with these people. I'm just pointing out that it is a talent. But now if you don't know why I say talent, talent is not something that you go learn. Talent is not something that you go practice. It's the way your nervous system was born. And there are people who are plugged in such a way that what they can say apparently has not only no connection necessarily with what they're thinking, it has no connection with thought. And that's what musicians try to say. That's where I was before I went off on the aside, if you remember. as a politician can say, well, I don't know, sometimes the crowd stirs me up, the love of the fatherland, the nationalistic spirit, they'll get me going, and I can make these speeches just on the spot. The minister, of course, he's kind of evangelist, will always say, well, sometimes the gods work through me and sometimes they don't. But when they do, Charlie, I'm on a roll. That's when I'm good. A musician says, I don't know. And of course, musicians, being one of the only performing arts that this seems to have an effect, I assume all you also know they're notorious about putting strange substances in their body. On the basis that they're out there playing, and some nights I just pick up my horn and I start, and it's like I'm somebody else. It just comes out, and the crowd loves it, I love it. And sometimes it don't work. It seems like a little drink helps, and then maybe a little something else. When they are in a certain kind of city, serious, attempted truthful mode, they just admit outright, I don't know how to do it. And so then you've got these non-music people, critics, writers, trying to write a book saying the definitive statement, what is jazz? Or even guys outside of music to just try to write a book. It's something crude. The best jazz recordings of 1986. And how crude is that? But when they start, they all feel, as they should, feel it incumbent upon them, at least in the preface, to say, well, for you people just picking up this book, I guess your question is, well, exactly, let's assume his name's Sam, exactly, Sam, what is jazz? And of course, Sam wish you hadn't asked that because he don't know. The point is, it's another one of these areas that I point out, nobody has ever defined jazz, those that tried to, and will admit that they're satisfied. Because those that attempt to define anything seriously are not mechanically wired up into it. That is, people who play jazz. And I'm not, for those of you who don't know, I am not singing the praises of jazz over anything else. That's not the point, and I'm not hearing as anything of mystical significance to jazz. I'm just using that as a diving board out here. But those who can do it, the same as any other field, they do not feel pressed to define it. In fact, if you want to side aside again, there's another old story that somebody asked Louis Armstrong, since I brought him up, they attribute it to him. Somebody asked him before he died, what is jazz? And he said, if you got to ask, you'll never know. Which was accidentally the city telling the truth as best it could. So it's never the people who actually are wired up to be involved with a certain activity that feel the necessity to define it. But those who do feel the necessity, who are driven in the city to define, which is a form of criticism, to define it, can't ever define it to satisfy themselves. And they admit it. No big deal. They always admit, well, this is not exactly it. And then they keep trying to turn the musicians like, well, you guys are playing it, and I'm just a very interested. I'm not a dilettante. I am a true lover of the music. And I would love, I've tried it, I took lessons, I've listened to music, I've transcribed solos, I just don't have it. I don't have it. I don't have the chops, I don't have the talent. Tell me what it is. When you get up there and start playing, what is it? And the musician will say, I got no idea. It's like the muse of the music god. Just comes upon me when it's right. I went through all of that. That's got really no significance insofar as music. I didn't go through it for that reason. It is something else. It is an ability in the city in a way that comes out in other areas, not this in the city, but in other areas, especially the arts, but a kind of person that pops up in areas, and it's not taken of any great significance. Those interested in it will pay some kind of due respect, like those interested in politics, when they find a speaker that can apparently do this. They will mention him. They will be gracious to him. People who love music, and if they like jazz, they give their best regards and their respect to jazz musicians. People who are interested instead of music and in politics, that their gig is religion, they go out to a tent and they'll speak real highly of Reverend so-and-so. That little son of a bitch, you ought to see him when he's wound up. He can come out there and make smoke and fog come out of the sawdust on the ground. When he is good, there ain't nothing like the man. This, I'm suggesting to you, is an area opposed to where I started out and what I was bringing up from last time we were talking. That people are wired up to feel the need and then the lack of this ability to think and to say the same thing. And right in the midst of life's body, because you couldn't be more in the midst of life's body than politics and religion, that there are people out there, just a few people, and nobody knows what to do with it. Nobody sees any great significance. But there are people evidently that can open their mouth, pick up a horn, and just go, bleh. And something comes out that seems entertaining to them and to other people, and go, wow. Comedians. And if pressed, those involved, when they're questioned, the truth is they don't know, do not know. Is that actually opposed to the dynamics of the situation wherein people are driven to feel as though they should be thinking and saying the same thing? Is that as opposed to? Is it possibly the same thing? If not, then we're left with a third area. That is what everybody else does. Everybody else picks up a music book. Lawrence Welk bands, all the great bands. I mean the great ones like Lester Lannon. That's an inside joke between me and New York. Since we decided that Lester Lannon, since Eric Clapton already had his day, I got him in New York, they're going to start graffitiing up the walls that Lester Lannon is God. But never mind that. That everybody else has got to have charts, a music book. All actors, no matter how great they are. If you never noticed, if you ever seen a great actor on a talk show, a great actor, God, are they dull. And some of them learned a long time ago not to show up. Some of the world's great living actors right now, if you notice, if you ever watch TV enough, some of them never show up to be interviewed. Not in person, at least. Never. Because they tried it once, maybe twice, and their manager and everybody else finally said, you know, you're about as interesting as a cement block. It's simply the truth that they got nothing to say. That they are, you can see them reading a script, or doing a script, of course, in a movie or a play, and you're just spellbound. And you find out that they have nothing to say. A musician that may be a virtuoso on his instrument, and you take away the music and just say, well, do you remember the song you just played? And he said, well, sort of. Well, could you just play some of it? And you would think that literally he may have played it enough times that, well, all right, yeah, I guess I could, but he doesn't want to. He almost can't play. And to get into the kind of ordinary intellectualizing is a waste of time, because you can say, well, somewhere in that man's nervous system, if you ask him, is this piece of music, this song, this big band, say he's with Lawrence Welk, how often do you guys play this number? And he says, well, maybe 3 times a week. And how long has it been in your list of songs you play? And he says, well, 2 years. And you can't play that song. An outside observation, ordinary nervous systems might say, well, that can't be true. If you do anything that many times and you're just reasonably sane, it becomes habit. And the guy might say, all right, maybe I could play some of the notes. I can almost sing some of the song, go dun 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 dun. Or my part, I'm playing second trumpet, is dun 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 dun. But he is almost want to refuse to try it. Such as having these great actors come out on a show, glad to have you here. Here you got a new movie. No, I don't. Oh, well, let's talk about you personally. God, I've admired you. What's new in your life? And the guy suddenly looks like a possum that you signed a flashlight on him again. He's looking for a director, a script writer. He's looking for a prompter. He looks down at his feet like there's going to be somebody down in the hole in the floor saying, da da da, the prompter man. All right. I jumped back to that to try and get you to see. I was going to try to point at almost a third area. What is ordinary life now? How long have I been asking you people, what are you going to say next? I hadn't asked you lately because it is so potent. It's like throwing acid on people, and pretty soon you become accustomed to it. Rats begin to love poison. But what are you going to say next? And the truth is, at the city level, you don't know. And yet you can't deal with that because that can't be true. Things would fall a fucking apart, right? Nothing would work. People must know what they're going to say next. Well, do you? Well, no, but it's a trick question. All right? What if I made you admit, oh, it's not a trick question? Then you'd have to say, all right, I'm the only person probably in the world that doesn't know what they're going to say next because everybody else does. My parents had to. How did they raise me? My priest, my rabbi, people I admire in history. They had to know. People right now in the city. The city council is having a meeting. Congress is in session. The president is somewhere talking to the premier of the USSR. They're talking about the fate of humanity. Are you going to tell me they're sitting there and they don't know what they're going to say next? No. Consciousness just, it's like turning the station became too irritating, and it just turns it out. You don't hear it. The question is, all this is related, is there a script going on in your life? Are you a non-jazz musician suddenly pushed out in the spotlight and they pull the charts away from you? You got no book. You got no music with you. Now you stand with your horn. You got the technique. That is, you can talk. The trumpet player can play. We just got through hearing him play. He was reading something that somebody else wrote. And there he is. And they say, do one. And he's like the actor. They suddenly say, well, tell us what's been going on in your life. Be like a minister, one of these guys, and rip the Bible away from him and kick him on the stage and say, get going. It's almost as though he's got to have it to look at. It's almost as though there's got to be a script. It's almost as though there's got to be a piece of music there, even though technically, in a way, you would insist the guy has got to know this. He's played it so many times. He might say, well, I guess I do. But it's almost as though he cannot pick up the horn and play it without the music there. Does this begin to sound familiar? No? Well, it shouldn't. Because what you've been looking for all your life. Now, in a sense, the other night I was referring to a constitution. But also, everybody is looking for the script. Everybody's looking for a piece of music. Everybody's looking for a vade mecum, their own Bible. Something that they can look at and go, oh, okay. If they had a Bible, a small b, vade mecum's better, but a small b Bible, for those of you who don't know Albanian. A small b Bible. That's what you need. It would have the Constitution in it. This is really something else, because the Constitution, if you recall, I was using it as another metaphorical drift. But what you're wanting now is a piece of music, a script. So that, and everybody has to participate, and you have to have enough time, that somebody come up and say, aren't you the guy that I heard say so-and-so the other day? Because if you are, I disagree with you so strongly that this is serious. And you say, all right, wait a minute. And you'd look up the subject, or you would have to, this kind of Bible would have to have great, great cross-references. like if nothing else, you'd have to look up embarrassing situation, and you'd have to look up and it'd tell you what to do or give you some suggestions. Stall for time. There's a good old city 1-2 punch. First off, try, no, I didn't say that. The guy said, I got a tape recording, I got 400 witnesses heard you say it, and he says, didn't say that's not what you meant. Oh, okay, but that's not what I meant. But there would be a book. And if it was not out here, it'd be where? Even better yet, somewhere in my brain, somewhere in my psyche, somewhere I could absorb all this, so that no matter what somebody asked me, it was like internally I can turn to a page and go, okay. All right, I'm glad you asked me that. And then you began to apparently extemporaneously is that not what everybody's looking for? Would that not short-circuit this apparent wired-up need and feeling of distraught or discomfort that you can't do it, but this need that what I think and what I say should be the same thing? What if you were not even faced with, as people in the city, at the ordinary level lead there, or you weren't faced with the problem of what will I think? Fuck what I think. I'll just look it up. Then if you see the joy, if you can become a fanatical follower of a good fanatical leader. Now it's looked at from outside in a condescending manner, to say the least. And at the worst, it's condemnable. People say, my daughter joined up with some crazy nut out in Los Angeles, and she believes everything he says. He wrote some little book, and I try to talk to her now. I can ask her, are you going to come home for the holidays? And suddenly, with a bad acting manner, she'll say, we do not believe in holidays anymore because they are a manifestation of evil capitalistic forces. And our great leader says, and her mother thinks, Jesus Christ, she is going crazy. Everybody recognizes that. But rather than being condemnable, her mother, in fact, may go, let's say her mother's Catholic, and she goes and talks to a priest. boy, if we could just do something. My daughter's gone nuts. She's taken up with a fanatic. She sounds like a robot. Anytime I ask her about everything from the weather to the holidays, she says, blah, 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 blah. And it's as though she's reading out of a book. The mother doesn't realize it, but if the mother at any time seemed to have the desire to be a great Catholic, that's exactly what she wanted to do. It just didn't work out as strong. Everybody wants to be a fanatic. That is, everybody wants to be at such a position that I don't even have to fool with the illusion of what should I think. It's just I can't find the right fanatical leader. If I could, I'd be a fanatic, because then I wouldn't even have to deal with the illusion that I've got to think, and that what I think should match what I say. Because if I can adopt somebody else's philosophy, that is, if I can adopt somebody else's apparent thoughts in toto, it's done for. I am not faced with the question, the problem of matching what I say with what I think, because I think whatever he thought. And whatever he thought, I say. Of course, I say he, I'm talking about whatever it seemed to be from a book. It's from life, but apparently from another human. Those who condemn fanatical followers are just jealous. They just don't know it. They're thinking, boy, I wish I could have gotten into it like that. The church let me down. They'll never be able to see it that way. But for somebody to be, my example, a mother to be upset, to say the least, over her daughter's behavior now that she's taken up with some fanatical cult leader, and all she does is parrot his words. Constantly. You can't ask her anything. You can't say, I like your new hairdo. We followers of so-and-so do not get involved with what seems to be the sensual attraction of one human to another. And you can just hear it as something that the guy said or wrote, and she's just saying it again. For people to be upset at that is jealousy. Because they are still burdened by the illusionary weight that I have got to think something, and then I'm supposed to match up what I say to it, and I don't like any of it. I don't like what I say. I don't like what I think. If I tried to say everything I think, it'd be even worse, maybe. And yet I got the feeling that I should be putting them together. That in some way this may be man's job here. I could ask you this. What possible relationship could this kind of activity have with all this? But I won't. Next subject. You realize that in the city that no one can fully feel successful. The city level, no one. The most famous, the rich, and the powerful cannot routinely wolf down their food, fall and roll down the floor totally unconcerned, tail wagging, like certain creatures that I know personally and have a great deal of respect for, and I think many of you do. People cannot do that in the city. My analog there was, plain enough was it not, I was thinking of a dog when I said all that. That it's dinner time. One thing as natural as anything you can think of, eating. And any decent dog will wolf down his food. But an old lady out in the country one time, I never did know it, told me what the definition of where the name dog came from was people that ate their food like a dog, you know. Generally, you do know any decent dog will run over and just wolf, gulp, just eat as fast as he can. You know that. And then as soon as he gets through, if he's decent at all, he's an inside dog, he'll run somewhere and fall down the floor and roll over and over, and pick his teeth and kick. And then maybe after a few minutes, do you realize it doesn't matter how much in the city, how much money you have, no matter how famous you are, that humans cannot routinely do that. A human eats their food, and then what? Well, first thing, you worry about your weight. One possibility. You worry about the cost of the meal. Now, let's say that you got through the meal, just like the dog is, through with the meal. Nowadays you'd worry about, I guess, your cholesterol level. You will always be worried about the source of the next meal. But the ability to totally be unconcerned and to fall on the floor and to wag your tail and to kick your feet and then take a nap is not possible in the city. That's just one example. But no one feels fully successful in the city. And that's connected to that almost everybody in the city wants to be somebody else. They do not necessarily think it in that manner. They would not necessarily ever volunteer that information verbally, and I might have to talk to them all of 30 or 40 seconds to trick them into admitting it. But in the city, routinely, everybody wants to be somebody else. That should not come as a great surprise, and that should not appear to be that pseudo-mystical, but it is a form of life, again, misdirecting, distracting man, and it's a form of support for these arbitrary contours. That if you're not satisfied being you, which people are routinely not, I say routinely not to give you breathing room again instead of saying everybody, because there are varying degrees. There are some people who are more satisfied. There are some people who are less dissatisfied than others. The powerful, particular line of life's body, they are less dissatisfied, but everybody routinely would like to be somebody else. And it has to do with the arbitrarily enforced contours that make you feel that you are this thing that you're dissatisfied with, that cannot eat a meal, cannot wolf it down just as fast as you can eat without choking. You don't thank anybody. The dog never thanks you. You just go and fall on the floor and roll and wag your tail, lick your lips if you had any. The cousin of that is the feeling that the arbitrary contours that make me should be extended in some way so that I could be somebody else. Is that just on one side of the tape, or is the whole tape?
It's the first side of the tape.
What time is it?
7:46.
Okay, turn the tape over. Under several guises, during several years, from Kyroots to everything, other methods, I've said such things as a real revolutionist would have no heroes. I've even said that people doing this, you should have no heroes. That is not on the basis, as you should know by now, was not on the basis of me trying to poke holes in any hero that you might have had back in the city so that I could replace it. Please notice that, because I've never tried to. I didn't say you should have no heroes except perhaps one. You should have no heroes. There is nobody worthy of being your hero. It's not that they're unworthy, but when you turn the corner, when you go into another dimension, people in the city that you might enjoy. I walk across the street to see James Brown most of the time, but somebody you'd enjoy is not your hero, because once you understand, once you turn a corner, you're no longer tied into being dissatisfied as to what life wired you up to be originally, because talk about a waste of time, let's don't talk about a waste of time because it's a waste of time, but you take it from there, then you're no longer interested in being anybody else because you realize at the city level, if you was anybody else, you'd be the same thing. It doesn't help in the city to be anybody else. That's the basis of most Western fairy tales, in case you ever noticed. Sometimes they have women as heroes, and sometimes they have men as heroines, and sometimes it's people living in castles, and sometimes they're living in hogsties. But those fairy tales, almost all of them are the same thing. I wanted to be somebody else, and I was, and it didn't work out. It worked out because if you're somebody else, you're the same thing. So when I say that you should not have any heroes, everybody's wired up to want to be somebody else. There was not an attack on any hero you had. If I'd insisted, tell me who your hero was, and everybody said, well, somebody, Joan of Arc. Any hero you had would have been a city person. Now, closer to what I'm pointing towards tonight, let me tell you, a real revolutionist is not only not interested in being anybody else, but he does not even want to be a different form of himself. Which would come as a surprise in the city if I talked to ordinary people, and I could, as always, I tell you this, it's no great trick, I could get an ordinary group of people under some context, and I could get them to admit that everybody wants to be somebody else, and then I could even get them to all be nodding and admit that, that sounds like a pretty fishy attempt, that there's probably open to a great deal of question. They go, yeah. But then if I said, yeah, but now to carry that a little bit further, the real thing is, if you were really somebody extraordinary, if you could change in some way that just people ordinarily want to and can't seem to find a way to, if you could, I'm telling you this, you would not only not want to be anybody else, you wouldn't even want to be a different version of you. And you go, wait a minute. Now, this has gone too far. You've gone into that great area of dumbness. It's not possible. It doesn't make any sense. It can't be true. But it is true. If you think it's not, it just shows how far you got to go. So it was a trick. It was an inescapable litmus test. And I think Fred Litmus is going to be here later with the answer sheet. And I'll let him grade his own test. I got my own business to take care of. A real revolutionist does not want to be himself in some glorified form. He does not want to be himself in some refurbished or reformed form. But in the city, if I got him to say, all right, you're right, everybody wants to be somebody else, whether it's just a vague feeling that I wish I was bigger, I wish I was more handsome, I wish I was richer, I wish I had more talent, I wish I was more like so-and-so. All right, I get him to admit, yeah, that sounds pretty tacky. But I do wish I had somebody else, and I could say, well, that's fine, we all do. And I'd say, but let me tell you the ultimate of this. Let me tell you. The ultimate is not only to abandon and to get free from the desire to be somebody else, to be just like somebody else. So you got one step going. They go, good. But the real step is not to be some new version of you. That's the only thing left. It's a changed me. A real revolution don't want to be a changed any fucking thing. You are not a revolutionist if you feel, and of course if you feel it, you are. If you are now a glorified, a reformed version, a different version of what you were, then you're nothing. Well, you're still you, of course, if you call that something. You do not want to be somebody else. You do not want to be like somebody else. You do not want to be like you. Redone, reupholstered, refinished. And yet to begin with, you got nothing else to compare it to. So that must be it. All right, okay, I'll admit it must be. But it's not. It just must be, that's all. So what else am I going to do? I'm fixing myself up. I'm faithfully listening as best I can on these nights, and I make notes, and I make mental notes, and I try things. Some of them I hear that you don't even say do it, but I hear it, and I think, that's the kind of thing that a person should put into practice, and I try it. And I am doing better. I feel much better about myself. Oh, that's all right. I'll admit, in the 3D world, it's better than feeling much worse about yourself. Because some of you couldn't stand that. Of course, some of you couldn't feel much worse about yourself. Of course, some of you shouldn't feel much worse about yourself. The strange part is, and this kind of information has been floating around, it pops out in religions, it pops out in philosophies. And of course, I've made it pop out. I've drawn the nervous system. I've pointed out to you a known fact. If we go back to the city, physiologically, neurologically, it's been known, there's no doubt, just to take it down to a very crude physical level, there's no doubt that a large portion of the human brain seems to be inactive. That reminds me of another aside. I keep reading, that the brain cells cannot, being part of the nervous system, is the part of the body that cannot rejuvenate itself. And I've read all my life that say things about every time you drink alcohol, 1 ounce of alcohol kills so many hundreds of thousands of brain cells that will never regenerate themselves. That is, drinking will permanently destroy some of your brain cells. And every time I heard about that, to me it was always like, well, they're shooting the unemployed. How can you be so concerned? At any rate, it is a known fact in the city. Just to tell you, I assume all of you have read that too, that the brain, the majority of it, does not seem to be active. So besides all the ancient and current ideas of a man being in some way reborn, spiritually, philosophically, what if it is much closer, as I keep hinting, if not saying, to the physical reality of turning yourself into a stranger to yourself, that you give birth to something new, but not something new. You don't give birth to, suddenly I was Fred the atheist, the heathen, and now I'm Fred the Muslim. Now I'm Fred the whatever, X. A revolutionist is not a blank any fucking thing. He's not a blank anything. He's got no new name. But in the city, can you see, it's not an attack on the religions. They've all been saying that in one form or the other, that if you faithfully follow this and the gods decide to bless you or you earn it in some way, you will be born anew. You'll be a new person. And what they're saying is, you'll get to be somebody else. And if you get to be somebody else, everybody else must have some closer match between what they think and what they say than you do. Everybody else must, by and large, know what they're going to say next, or the world will fall apart, right? You think, yeah, I don't even like to think about it. They can't be as bad as me. So if you're somebody else, it'll be a load off your mind, right? Yeah. But in the city, to be something else, you simply got to take a new name. It's like you have finally found the ultimate summer camp. And some big fat guy, some big fat woman, with a collar turned backwards, a little skull beanie on, wrapped up in a robe, they take your underwear and they cut out the name that you originally had that your mother sewn in, and they sewed in a new one. And now every time you think about it, you look in your underwear and you think, I'm now a refurbished Muslim. And of course, as you should know, or else you don't belong in this, that doesn't satisfy the people who want to be satisfied. It does not satisfy the mutants. You cannot swap one name for another. You cannot swap new sets of contours for another one. It is to truly, in what amounts to a very mundane, carnal sense, you in a very small way give birth to a new nervous system. It's your same old nervous system. But you go into a new area, and it was not city-born. Any of you who also like the ideas, I assume you know enough that's not limited to the great Christian Judaic religion background, that all over the world there's stories out in little crude small religions out in jungles of immaculate births. That is, people are suddenly born and they got no human parents. Do you hear the story? That there are people that pop up and you can't figure how in the hell did they get to be like that? Because their mother and father, I thought I knew them. It was old Sam and Sarah that used to live down at the farm down at the end of the road. But God, look what this guy knows. Look who he is. Doesn't make sense. The way you make sense out of it is their progenitors, if they had any, had to be of some higher nature. They got to be from another planet. That might fly nowadays as well as they're the sons or daughters of gods. But what they're saying is their nervous system has no established precedent of which I can conceive. Therefore, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. What the real revolutionists, to give a little more description, rather than just leave it at activating the nervous system, which actually tells you all you need to know, except I realize that's not all you want to know. The real revolutionist not only is not interested in being anybody else, not only is not interested in being a reformed, refurbished, glorified, magnified, refried version of himself, not only that, well, let me put it in a positive way. Not only is he not interested in that, to put it in a more positive way, what he is interested in is this. He is interested in becoming, rather than a passive patsy, he's interested in becoming an active, willful part of the great overlapping. That's it. It's a place where all that's known overlaps in you with all that's not known. It's where everything that seems to be true today, everything that's necessary to keep city life stable, gyrotized, and that which would appear to be all the way from chaotic to dangerous, where it overlaps, is exactly where someone doing whatever the hell this is trying to get to. But everybody else trying to do something, little teeny ways, very weak ways to those apparently devoting their life to some great mystical quest. Everybody in there is trying to go in one direction. They're not trying to find where things overlap. And in fact, in the city, of course, that's ridiculous. In the city, you've got to find, at least the best you can, what is the proper road to the truth. Maybe Bill someday can make me a new neon over here that I can make the truth. All right, to do that, you've got to work on it. If somebody's going to try to go to the truth, if you're going to go from Philadelphia to Cleveland, you're certainly not going to take off south. You'd be ridiculous. You pick out the shortest way and you go in that direction. That's the only thing that makes any sense. That's the only thing that makes any lineal reason in the city. But to do this, to get your own nervous system, to give birth, to give a bastard birth, forget about the Immaculate Conception. To do that, you are trying to find where things overlap. You're trying to become a willful part of it. Otherwise, you stay in the city, you stay what you are, no matter, and what you are may be an R that continually disclaims any interest in being what it are. That is, everybody's what they are, including those people that say, I don't want to be what I are. Well, that's what you are. Yeah, but I hate it. Good. You're one of the people. Well, I mean, I say good, it's fine with me. You're one of the people that are what you are, and you hate it. Yeah, but I mean, I really hate it. Okay, you really hate it. Then that's what you are. But that other person next to me, they don't hate being what they are as much, so I'm a better person. All right, so you're a person that's what you are, and you hate what you are, and you're better than people that don't, so that's what you are. We're going to have your drawers full if we got a soul label that big to carry all that. Plus, he may be an unrecognized composer of 127 unrecognized great symphonies. The label's going to get bigger than your underwear, sir. The revolutionist is attempting to become a willful, active part of the great overlapping. And he's no longer interested in simply being a part of that kind of enforced, arbitrary contours that separate him from everybody else, that separate him internally from what he is as opposed to what he feels like he should be, then from what he feels like he should be to what he should be doing about it, to what might be the possible ways to go about it. Every dichotomy is not just two different roads to the revolutionist. It is he has to bring it into sight and see it's not two different directions, because what they in fact do is overlap, and that's where what I'm looking for resides. Not in the contour, not in the arbitrarily enforced frontiers between everything. It is that kind of arbitrary frontier that gives rise, among other reasons, among other purposes, to the feeling that I do not say what I think, because there seems to be a difference. Of course, in the city, when I say things that seems to be, in the city, seems to be is not just an understatement, it's a dumb understatement. There is a difference. If there wasn't, then people wouldn't worry about, well, tell me what you mean. Won't you say what you feel? Why can't I say what I feel? You can't say it because there's a contour. There's a frontier between it. As far as you're concerned at city level, I asked you the question, if you recall, Wednesday, is there actually a difference between what people think and what they say? And if you would follow me along and let me be the conductor and you be the instruments, I could make city consciousness go, yeah, there is, no doubt. And then just for no particular reason, I could make you, some of you follow along and go, no, there's not. But obviously there is. If there wasn't, there wouldn't be two different words. You wouldn't have think and speak. Speech and thought would be the same thing. So in the city, if you got two different words, then you've got a frontier. You've got a contour between the two. They are two different things, but all different things overlap. Now, said he hopefully, do you see any connection between that and not having a script? Do you see any connection between that and being able to engage in jazz thought? The word jazz thought would be jazz speech, if you're going to say anything. That it's not a problem of whether there's a difference between what you think and what you say, it's that there is no problem. Oh, you thought I was going to say that there is no problem between what you say and what you... If you got two choices, there's a problem. The answer, in this particular case, to say that it's not a problem of the difference between what you say and what you think, the solution to that is not to cure this problem. The solution to that problem is there's no problem. If you see where they overlap, one more time I'll draw at least. Remember the one I used, the eyeballs, and sight itself, stereoscopic vision, what gives everything depth in the 3D world is the overlapping. It's the two different sides of that cup, of my finger. Everybody knows that. As always, it is a literal, hardwired, three-dimensional example of something else. It's not metaphorical, although I have to describe it that way, by starting out with a physical example, a material example. But everything that seems to be, which life is, divided into two, that there is a frontier between everything. There's a frontier between every letter of the alphabet. You know that, don't you? I thought you knew that. There's a frontier between, let's see, what's the two favorite letters to most people? E. A lot of people don't appreciate it, but Z. Now you may not know this, but there's a lot of difference between those words, those letters. And it doesn't matter what the difference is, if you're waiting for me to tell you. I don't even know. I'm not even interested. But I know this, they're not the same. If they were, you wouldn't have two letters. I mean, if they were the same, just take your choice. It doesn't matter, then we don't need that one. That's the same thing. So, of course, if that's true, then there is a frontier between every word. If there were not a difference between cup and hand, you'd try to drink your hand. You'd try to pour coffee in your hand. But when you got through with it, you'd crumple up your hand and you'd throw it away. In the 3D world, there must be, at the very minimal level, there is a frontier between everything that has a name. This is not just silly. There is a difference between those two letters, between any two words. Anything that's got a separate name, there is a frontier between it. And if they do not appear to be in conflict, then you're talking about E over here, Z over here, hand over here, cup over here, me over here, you over there, speech over here, thought over here. But everything overlaps. This is really fast, but they all overlap. If your hand and a cup didn't overlap, you wouldn't have a hand, or you wouldn't have a cup. They got to overlap. Somewhere they come in contact, but there still seems to be a frontier, that my hand does not become the cup. Where it overlaps is where there is no problem. Where it overlaps is where the secret is, at least at the 3D level. Of course, when you see it, then you can move on to something else. But that is where everybody else believes there's secret knowledge. that the powerful people are hiding it from us, or the gods are hiding it from us, or that only Jesus or Buddha or Moses knew it, and goddamn if they didn't die before I got here. Now the secret is where it overlaps. The secret is where everybody else feels there's this frontier, as they're supposed to, that there is this serious gap between what I am and what I should be, between what I'm doing and what I should be doing. That I do not say by any means automatically what I think. And yet, I know I should. I should be working toward that. You can't work toward anything. Oh, sure you can. Go ahead. But just don't waste your time coming back here. Go ahead. Everybody needs a hobby. At least most places they won't put you in jail for it. The real revolutionist is not trying to redefine himself. He is not trying to reestablish or to redefine any of his current outlooks. It is to become a part of the great overlapping. In another sense, I know we don't have time for it tonight, you could look at the great overlapping as a place where a 3D world turns the corner. The great overlap is always tomorrow. It is as though, if you can follow this with a 3D picturization right quick, that everything looks, but right there, to cut this off, is where things turn the corner. It really goes into the fifth dimension, not just the fourth. But right there, it turns the corner. That's what it is that people that have these accidental excursions into that come back and say, Jesus, I can't tell you what happened, but it was staggering. It was the kind of things in another parallel direction that many of you people, I'm sure, experienced fooling around with certain psychedelic drugs in the past. That I saw something that there was no doubt had significance and was no doubt a reflection of some reality of which I'm not normally aware. But now that the drug's gone, now that I can't seem to revive it at will, or even whenever I retake the same substances, I know this, there was something there that was just as real as this is, and I can't bring it back. It doesn't even make sense now, but when I was there, it made all sorts of sense. It is an overlapping of everything that seems to be fragmented, if not in opposition to each other, here, at this level. We're out of tape. And I guess we're out of here. Goodbye, New York, California, Florida, Montana, Oregon, Pennsylvania, New Jersey,